Jacinda Ardern, Chris Hipkins, Shea Verrill and Grant Robertson have all refused to front in person for the public inquiry into our COVID response. None of them wanted the heat or the pressure and the truth, instead choosing to cooperate privately with the COVID inquiry. Too chicken to do this in public. They locked us down, then when it came time to front up and be accountable, they took legal advice and then quickly hid behind it. Tonight, I'll give you my take on this. Let's go.
Are we paying these people to front up, or are we paying them to fly to Wellington to eat their lunch? Should you really lose your career for refusing to take part in a 90-minute lesson about Māori culture? This government doesn't actually have any idea how to get economic growth. Show us what you made of, Prime Minister.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan, Garner.
Okay, you're with the Editor-in-Chief. Welcome, everybody. I'm Duncan, Garner. Good to have you along, and please subscribe. Helps us keep them at bay at the door, Also tonight, we've also got Max Rashbrooke on how to get people back into work. Unemployment's a big issue in New Zealand. So how do we get people, especially young people, back into work? He's got this new research think tank he set up, and he's come up with some solutions. Truth is, 150,000 unemployed, another 400,000 underutilized in New Zealand. 1 in 4 boys, aged 15 to 19, not working. 15% of 15 to 24-year-olds not working. What can we do? So he has some solutions. He'll be with us very shortly. And the missing former ministers at the COVID inquiry. Labor doesn't want to play ball. Do I send out the missing persons crew? Or should we just slam dunk them? I think we'll go with the latter. Let's go.
It's the Slam Dunk.
Okay, it reads like a roll call of shame, folks, doesn't it? That's what it is, a roll call of shame. Too chicken to front the public inquiry into our COVID response. The 4 big ministers that drove the COVID response. Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister, locked us down too long. Grant Robertson, Finance Minister, and Treasury's already said he spent far too much. Chris Hipkins said we were front of the queue for the vaccine. Truth is, it hadn't arrived. We were nowhere near the front. We were at the bottom. And Shea Verrill, Health Minister. The 4 former ministers who were to appear at the COVID inquiry next week. But they're now all going to be a no-show. Hence, the public inquiry has been cancelled due to their demand that they appear in private. Hipkins, for his part, says he's played ball all along, just in private.
I provided written evidence to the inquiry. I answered every question that they had. I attended the interview that they scheduled for me. They had asked for 2 hours. They ran out of questions after an hour. They've indicated they have no further questions for me at that point.
Yeah, they cut and run, didn't they? They don't want to be held responsible in a public setting. They don't want to be seen in public talking about it. Happy to take the salary and the job and the perks of power and office at the time, and happy to lock us down and keep us locked down far too long. Happy to see people lose their jobs because they didn't take the vaccine. But it came time for them to be accountable. These publicly elected representatives who were paid by us, and a couple of them continue to be paid by us, they pushed the escape button and all apparently independently, came to this decision, on their own, of course, to not front publicly. They've conjured this up. It looks wussy. It looks like you're scared. But if the question is about promoting her book, then of course Jacinda fronts for a nice fireside chat with her sympathetic friends at Radio New Zealand. Happy to front to promote her book. Refusing to front to justify her decisions, which affected all New Zealanders. I don't respect that. I think it's spineless and gutless, and it's about carefully managing and manipulating her image to suit herself. Jacinda first, everyone else second. The right thing to do would be to front so the public feels like there's a form of accountability there, you see. From all 4 of them, they say they didn't jack this up. I don't believe them. Do you believe them? Of course they discussed this approach to stay under the radar. What, you think they all made independent decisions not to front? Don't take us as that stupid, Mr. Hipkins. You want us to believe you? Of course you spoke to Jacinda. Well, you sorted it out somehow. Stop treating us like nincompoops. And I think your absence from this COVID public inquiry, which now gets collapsed, tells us everything we need to know. How did you sneak out of it? You paid for a legal opinion to get you off. God, really? Oh, it looks like official advice, but you asked for and paid for a legal opinion that you ordered. It looks quite frank. I mean, and you told the lawyers what you wanted them to write and find. It looks gutless. It's staged. It's a setup. It looks quite frankly gutless after years in which our lives were turned upside down. You're happy to lock us down like you did, and you locked us down for weeks and weeks, especially in Auckland. And you're on the big stage every day, lockdown after lockdown. There we were in our houses. As the world opened up, we stayed locked away. And why? Already we've heard from the first stage of the inquiry, which was critical. It was really critical. It said health was just one factor, and they didn't take into account the wider well-being or job security and finances and the human connections that we were lacking. It's more than just about your health. And on the money front, we spent far too much, for which we now pay the price, of course. Politics can be pretty complex for people, and they pretty much tune out, and they're just not interested. But they will understand this one. When the people who ran the country during COVID were invited to front publicly to discuss their actions, they all apparently just ran off on their own accord and said no thanks. They didn't collude. They just made up their own minds, and they were all the same decisions. They said no thanks. I consider Hipkins, who says he didn't jack this up, but Jacinda, I think he's telling us porkies. And I think overall it's a spineless, wussy decision not to front. If you think you did so well, then front to tell us your great story. You say you've got a good story to tell it. That you won't suggests you now understand that big mistakes were made. But we'll never know, because when the time came to be accountable in front of the New Zealand public, you wouldn't front up in person. You all chose to run like chickens into the henhouse. And behind closed doors, voters are most unlikely to forget something as simple as that. They will understand what it means to run and hide, and that's what you've done. Sometimes the best scandals are really simple, not complex, and the public gets it.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, so 150,000 Kiwis are unemployed, 400,000 underemployed. They need more hours, they're underutilised. Do we need to do something more with them? Do we need to get them set up with employers? Do we spend enough trying to get them into work? Max Rashbrooke has set up a new research think tank, IDEA, and he says New Zealand simply doesn't invest in getting these people to work. In overseas countries, they spend far more money than we do per head of GDP to get these people linked in to jobs and to employers. And we just do it by paint by numbers. We don't do a very good job of it, he says. And he joins me now. Max, g'day. Nice to have you on.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so you've looked at not just youth unemployment, but unemployment across the board, and where we're at in New Zealand. What are your numbers? You've got 400,000 underutilised, or just not getting enough hours, and about 150,000 out of work. So we've got 550,000 people in work but not satisfied, or not in work at all. It's a big number for a small country.
Yeah, look, it is. I mean, I'd probably say it's 400,000 all up, because there's a lot of overlap between who's on job seeker support and who's underutilised and all the rest of it. But yeah, it's a huge number of people. And look, I mean, and that's sort of not surprising, because we know at the moment the economy is in terrible shape. But, you go back just a couple of years ago, unemployment was down at 3.2%. You had employers crying out for staff, but there were still, hundreds of thousands of people on welfare. So I think there's something pretty wrong with that system, and we're already not making the most of people's potential there.
No, I wonder, and this is why I think that the government's struggling in the polls, is because it's the economy, stupid. It's all about jobs, and if you don't have a job, then you're not happy, and if you have a job where you're underutilised, then you want more hours, then you're not doing well enough, so you're unhappy. Or you might be in the wrong job and you're unhappy, or you might not be secure in your job. So I think this is where we're at in New Zealand right now. You say the economy is really struggling. It is, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, it is, absolutely. And, at the moment, we've got a system that's really focused on trying to push people off welfare and into jobs. And at the moment, you just think, well, where are the jobs that they're going to find? I mean, that just seems crazy. Right now, what we should be doing is really, really investing, I think, in vocational education and training, and building up the skills of those people who are on benefits, so that when the economy does recover, they're actually in a position to take those jobs. But that's not really what the system's doing at the moment, I don't think.
Well, has the system ever done that? Has the system ever invested in those unemployed people?
Oh, probably not to the extent that it could, but I mean, it did a bit more, back in the day. You think about some of the PEP schemes, maybe in the 80s and 90s, or, when Task Force Green was a bit more of a thing than it was. And look, and I'm not going to say that every single one of those schemes worked well. They probably didn't. But there was a bit more of an attempt, I think, to find gainful employment, meaningful things for people to do while they're unemployed, rather than the current system, which I think a lot of the time is just focused on telling people how to write a CV, or sort of pushing them at the first job that comes, rather than actually building up their skills and their capabilities.
One of the numbers that I've picked up over the last year or so is that 15 to 19-year-old unemployment rate, or 15 to 24, but that 15 to 19, which is somewhere up around 1 in 4. A young New Zealander is not doing too much. that's a problem, because you're going to spend a long time on welfare if you start getting connected to welfare at that age. The research shows that you'll be on it for quite some time.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I tend to use the figure more of the young people who aren't in education, employment, and training. Because you can be pretty sort of gainfully employed if you're a young person, if you are doing training, if you're doing an apprenticeship or whatever. But yeah, so the young people who aren't in any of those things, education, employment, or training, it's about 13% of 15 to 24-year-olds, and that's the highest it's been in a decade. And yeah, that's a really worrying figure. And I think the issue we have is that a lot of these young people have got pretty deep-seated issues. They've grown up in households where they haven't seen their parents working. They don't really know what a work ethic is often, and they haven't done particularly well at school. And an anecdote that really stuck out for me when I was doing the research was I talked to a regional education provider who'd been asked to assess a cohort of these sort of teenagers who are on one of these work readiness programs. And he said the majority of them, I think at 12 out of 20 of these young people had a year one reading age, so they've got the reading age of a 6-year-old, but they were being pushed through this 13-week program that was supposed to place them into employment. And I just think for a lot of the young people, they need much more much deeper, much more patient support if they're actually going to be ready to move into the workforce.
And that's going to cost money, and it does cost money. I mean, if you have to invest in these people to get them into work. And I've looked at some of your research, and we are right down the bottom when it comes to investing in job seekers. Other countries are miles ahead of us in terms of their investment per GDP.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we spend about half as much on trying to support people from welfare into work as the typical developed country does. And look, you're right. I mean, spending that money is expensive up front, but there's definitely a payoff from it. You look at internationally, the people who go through these sorts of programs, that's vocational training or wage subsidies or even, public sector, jobs being created. They're a good, about 10% more likely to end up in a job afterwards. So after going through one of these programs, they probably earn about 15 to 20% more than people who don't go through them. And unemployment in those countries is a lot lower than it would be if they didn't have those schemes. So yeah, I think we're missing a trick here by not making that upfront investment that would reap long-term rewards.
I think we've pulled some of the investment. Actually, if you look at programs in the last couple of years, there has been a bit of money pulled out of some of these areas. What about youth guarantee? See, I believe that, I've written this before, but, when you put these kids through the education system from 5 to 16, 17, it's a bit of an investment, right? And so then we let them go at the front gate. We've got to somehow have a sort of a guarantee where they can walk into an apprenticeship or walk into some kind of opportunity rather than going on to welfare. Australia, you can't go into welfare from leaving school. No, I wonder if we need to do more in that area.
Yeah, I think we do. I think there's a whole lot more we could do with vocational education. There's lots of kids who've got real talents, but they're not classic academic talents. And, we're not the only think tank that said this. The New Zealand Initiative has said, we just don't give young people a clear pathway. We don't say to them when they're 16, look, if you do this trades qualification, if you do this apprenticeship, and we'll help you out with that, there's a clear pathway through to the trades to earning a really good living in 5 or 6 years. So we don't do that very well. And then, the other thing that we sort of looked at in the report was these things in other countries called youth guarantees or youth job guarantees or whatever. And basically, they're about saying, if you've been unemployed for a year, let's say as a young person, the government will just say, look, we've got your back. We'll pay for you to do a job placement for a year somewhere. And that could be in government, or it could be with a company, or it could be with an NGO or a local council. And those schemes really work, because they give the young people something to do. They've got something on their CV. They're learning work skills. They're just learning about the basic habits of going to work and turning up on time. And the kids who go through them are much more likely to be in, proper private sector employment several years later, because the state's, it's come in and it's broken that cycle you were talking about of getting on the benefit young and then staying on the benefit. You've got to do something to break that cycle, I think.
Yeah, no, and the best thing to break a cycle is either education or a job or both. I mean, it can change your life entirely and, hugely. And I would have thought, what's the point of paying someone equivalent of the job seeker, say the dole or whatever it is, when you could use that perhaps as a subsidy to get them into a placement. I would have thought there's much better use of money.
Yeah, I totally think it is. And I think if you do it in a targeted way, it's a really good use of funds. I mean, I think governments have in the past run into problems with sort of make work schemes.
Yeah.
You know, that idea, sort of everyone who's on the dole, let's just chuck them at an NGO and get them, cleaning up streams or something. And that's not very effective because it's really hard to do those schemes when they're massive and the kinds of work that people do is not that useful. It's not really preparing them for permanent private sector employment. But if you target it, if you just do it with the young people who've been unemployed for a long time, and you really make sure that the placement is a lot like the job that they might get in future, then yeah, it's so much better than just leaving them sitting on the dole.
Yeah.
And just one other point, at the moment the system focuses a lot on sort of, job search activities and saying, look, if you want to keep your benefit, you've got to apply for this many jobs. And I did a big sit-down interview with a bunch of young job seekers in Auckland, and they just said it is so dispiriting. We apply for hundreds of jobs. Most of the time, we don't even get a rejection email. We just don't hear anything at all, and it is so sapping for our self-confidence. And I just thought, what's the point of doing that? That I don't see what that's achieving for those young people.
I've asked the question about this. I've asked HR people about this and tried to get to the bottom of it. What happens now is when you put your, you'll probably know this, but you put your CV in, and the first person to read it will be AI. So AI will scan it. You'll know all this, and they're scanning it for like words from the advertisement that they've put in there. So if you can basically plagiarise, copy the ad into your response, it might be quite useful. But they will, if you haven't got a tertiary qualification, or you haven't got something that they are looking for, then the AI will dump you into the basket. You're gone. They won't reply. There's no obligation for them to reply. They said there's just no. It just won't happen because there's too many people across all these different environments to actually reply to. So they can't get thousands of letters out to say sorry, you didn't make it, which is pretty rough on people because it does go to their spirit and how they feel about themselves, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it really does. It really does. And look, and I'm sure your listeners don't want the welfare system to be an easy ride or anything like that. And we shouldn't just abandon people on benefits or give out free money, but just this really sort of cookie cutter kind of throughput based system where you just force people to apply for hundreds of jobs. Yeah, I don't really see what it does, especially as you say, when it's just AI is cutting out most of them. You've got to I think you've got to start, and I interviewed a community provider up in Katikati who was no soft touch, but she said, if the young people are struggling, even if they say, oh, I don't want to work, you've got to start by understanding why are they saying that?
Yeah.
Why would someone be in that position? And it's because they've grown up in a household where people don't work. They haven't had that work ethic imbued into them like my parents did for me, and like I would hope most parents do. These kids are really, really struggling, and they don't see work and income as a group, as an organization that's going to sit alongside them and help build up their skills. They see work and income as a place that is very unfriendly and unwelcoming and makes them feel terrible often and sort of stigmatizes them. And often, they'll go out of their way not to deal with work and income actually because they hate it so much. And when they are dealing with it, it's just not something that's really helping them all that much. That's how they perceive it.
I spend a bit of time in the Hokianga. That's where we, sort of end up. Well, my mates are there, and it's a pretty tough place to get work. There's no jobs. There's sort of society left there a long time ago in terms of the banks and all that, New Zealand Post and everything. So it's been left for 30 to 40 years to, in many ways, rot. So you've got intergenerational welfare and dependency now. And so there's young kids there that haven't seen their dads go to work and they haven't seen their fathers go to work. And so you've got this dreadful combination now where you've got this intergenerational problem. How do you fix that? How on earth? Because there's no jobs there, Max. So you're talking about an area where it's, I don't know, you've probably been there, but it's deprived. It's depressed.
Yeah, but that's a tough one. I think sometimes in some situations, there's a bit more work around than people think. Again, this community provider in Katikati I was talking to said, people say there's no jobs in this area, but there's tons of jobs going in the pack house. Often there's jobs for forklift drivers and stuff like that. yeah, it's hard work, but I do tell the young people, she said, that there are jobs there. But yeah, look, I mean, I take your point. There are areas where, as you say, industry's gone, a lot of the services have gone and all of that. Look, I mean, that's a bit beyond what we studied in the
Yeah,
report. I
sure.
do think regional economic development is this big puzzle for New Zealand that we haven't cracked. Can we do more? I mean, with New Zealand First had attempts through the Provincial Growth Fund and things like that,
Mm.
but I think most people would be pretty skeptical about whether that's worked very well. I think we need look, it can sound like a bit of a cop out, but I do think we need a proper government strategy on these things to say, okay, area by area, what is there more industry that we could bring or bring back to these areas? Like, there's always those proposals in around East Cape for building a factory that actually takes all the slash, takes all the wood
Yeah.
offcuts
Mm.
and turns it into stuff, really high value product you could sell overseas. I always hear about that, and then nothing ever seems to happen. And I'd like to think that a bit of concerted government effort and a bit of planning could actually get some more of those industries off the ground. Because otherwise, what do? You are just leaving those places to rot, and that just has terrible outcomes for them. And then we all bear the cost of that as a country.
What about apprenticeships? We don't hear much about apprenticeships these days. I know Labor was pretty strong on this stuff a while back, but where are we at with apprenticeships? Because I would have thought in recessionary times like this, because it feels like a recession, this is when you put people through these programs and then you're ready to go with the boom afterwards. So we've got all these builders because we've lost them all. So isn't it now the time to be building up the skills?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And look, and there are some success stories on that, I think, in the last, probably across a number of governments, last 10, 15, 20 years, we've invested more in apprenticeships. I've talked a lot about what doesn't go well, but there are some programs that work. Like there's one that started under the last government called Mana and Mahi. You might have heard Woody Jackson talking about it. And that's an apprenticeship-based program, and that works pretty well. And I think it works well because it's focused on connecting the young person to the employer.
Yeah.
So there's a subsidy for the employer to take them on, put them through the apprenticeship. Both the employer and the young person can access, pastoral support, mental health support, that kind of thing. And the young people who go through Mana and Mahi, they're about, I think on average, they both are working like an extra half a year, compared to their young peers who haven't gone through that program. So that's pretty successful, and some of the investment in that has been maintained. But yes, but I do agree. I think we should be stepping up those programs, but then also having the guaranteed pipeline of work.
Mm.
Right? So, and I think that's one of the things the government, to its credit, is doing. It's trying to say let's have a guaranteed pipeline of construction projects,
Mm.
so the young people know next 5, 10, 20 years there'll be projects for them to work on, rather than all the projects getting scrapped every time a new government comes in, and it's just and it's just chaotic.
Yeah, but we have this fast track system, which has produced so far one consented project, and there's a number in the pipeline, but who knows when they will start. Fast track looks pretty slow, even though it's fast track. I know it's faster than what it would normally be, but it's just hard work getting things moving, isn't it? This government's almost been in 2 years now, and they've got one consented project under the fast track. It shows how tough it is, right?
Yeah, and I think it is, like, I know it's a cliche, but it's that proverbial ship that takes a long time to turn around. But I think it's that joining up the schemes that's crucial. I mean, you look at the CRL in Auckland, which is going to be
Amazing.
completed reasonably soon. Huge project, tons of skills, tons of young workers, incredibly expensive machinery. If there's not another project to follow it, then all of that skills, machinery, is just going to go straight back overseas again. So I think if we can build some certainty between National and Labor, at least they can agree on, some core pipeline of work that goes out in the future. I think that's the long-term fix for that problem.
And crucially, what we heard out of Christopher Luxon's summit that he had with international investors was that the crucial machine, which was boring the holes here in Auckland, and it's a beast, it's staying here. So it was originally planned to go. It's now staying here because the pipeline, there's also that motorway heading north as well, which is going to be extended. So the machine is not going away. So that's a good sign, because if it's staying here, it's going to be busy working. So those sorts of things are quite crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look and you think, what you and I are talking about, Duncan, it's all about a whole lot of whole lot of pieces of the puzzle that we need to click together, right? So it's about having the pipeline of projects. Okay, that's starting to happen. But then it's also about getting the young people into apprenticeships, and there's a bit of that. And then you come back to what I was talking about earlier. It's about making it clear to young people that there is that pathway, because at the moment, I think that's just not obvious. And you got to remember, for some 15 and 16-year-olds, when they're struggling at school and they're not in good families, it's just, they don't. I mean, I went to a school with a whole bunch of these kids, and they couldn't see any future for themselves. And you'd think, oh, it's obvious. You do the training and you can become a plumber or a chippy or whatever. It's just not obvious to these young people. And they don't believe that pathway is there, and they need someone to say to them, look, here's the steps you need to take, and here's the future that's in front of you.
Yeah, take one person, can take someone as a mentor, or someone can hop into someone's life and they can actually change their life by putting them on the right path. My final question is, with AI and the huge disruption in our economy, in the world economy, we're seeing this. We don't know where it's going to end up. Our kids are going to school and learning things that may or may not be relevant. We don't know what the jobs are going to be tomorrow. I wonder, if you don't have the skills, and if you are these people that are struggling without work, you're going to be really left behind, aren't you, in that sort of fast-paced modern world which we're in, which doesn't wait for you anymore. It is so quick, and it's developing so quickly, this AI and the world economy.
Oh, yeah, totally. And I think, and what does that tell you? Well, one, we need to make sure that the school system gives kids like a really good foundational set of skills, that will make them adaptable, that will mean they can adjust to this world. Secondly, I think in the short term, AI is going to create a whole bunch of jobs as well as destroying them.
Correct.
It might be a different story long run. But there will be a lot of disruption in the workforce. You already see coding, software programming jobs going, but other jobs being created. So we're going to need even more of these things that I've been researching, these welfare to work programs, to help people through that transition. Then I guess, and just the last thing I'd say is we need a system that adapts more quickly. One of the things that employers said to me was that if you want a new qualification, that because this new bit of technology or there's this new area that we need to be good at in New Zealand, it can take years to stand up a qualification that a private training or a polytech can provide. Whereas in other countries like Germany and Switzerland, Denmark, that do these things really well, they can turn around a new qualification in a year with no loss of quality. And I think that's the sort of thing we're going to have to be doing in New Zealand as well. Yeah,
we need to be flexible. Our policymakers need to be flexible too. Max, great to see you. Thank you so much for your insight, and let's hope that some of this stuff actually happens. Good on you, mate. Thank you.
Thank you.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.
Okay, time for letters to the editor. And I've had a number of these in, actually. How can I get in touch, Duncan, with Chris Smith and Cliff Curtis? The episode you had them in was on YouTube. Can you please advise? I want to get into the property ladder as well. Now, the best way to get in, I've had a number of these. So if you do want to look at this blocks deal with the housing, with the 1% deposit, get hold of them here. Go on to the website, www.blocks, so it's blocks.co.nz. And on that website, you'll see that there's links to Chris Smith, and I would send the email to Chris. Okay? So jump on that Blocks website. So it's www.blocks, 2x's.co.nz. And there's been a number of emails like this. So jump on that website, and they'll be able to help you. Okay, that's us. Thanks for your feedback and your support. Get in touch with our social media at Duncan Garner Podcast on TikTok and Instagram, or flick us an email, duncan@rover.nz to my team. Thank you, guys. Brody, the man. We'll do it again tomorrow. And remember, life's no dress rehearsal. There is no curtain raiser, and there's no cheerleaders. This is it. We live in one of the best places on earth. So get up and enjoy it. Look after yourselves. Take care. Behave yourselves. Have a great day. Take care. Ta-ra.
Editor-in-Chief with Duncan Garner.